So thank you everyone for coming, to all of you here in the room and everybody on Zoom. Thank you, Ingrid and the team, for giving me the space to speak today, not just on behalf of Croatian Studies, but also on behalf of all the languages at Macquarie University, especially the 5. They are kind of proposed to be cut. I want to thank you all, I think, by being here, either online or here in the room. I think you all support our efforts to preserve language programs across Australia, at least in tertiary education, but in general as well. Just briefly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today, which we heard before, but just for this talk, the Wallumattagal clan of Darug Nation. This always was, always will be Darug country. So briefly about myself, Ingrid introduced me, but I've been associated with Croatian Studies since 2016. And initially as a casual lecturer, and since 2020 as the director of Croatian Studies Centre, succeeding Luka Budak, who held this role for 35 years. So today I aim to illustrate what the Croatian community in Australia and the Croatian government view as a successful collaboration between local and overseas government bodies, a university, and a local migrant community. Despite being considered successful for over 40 years, this collaboration faces an uncertain future due to an administrative plan to discontinue language programs deemed unprofitable or lacking prestige. I'll briefly introduce the Croatian language and discuss the achievements of the Australian Croatian community in recognizing the Croatian language, which led to the inception of Croatian Studies 40 years ago, and the subsequent establishment of the Croatian Studies Centre. I'll touch on funding sources crucial for Croatian Studies, but some other language programs as well at Australian tertiary institutions, currently and in the past, and conclude by highlighting the impact and relevance of such programs. So Croatian language is often termed a small language, or outside Croatia, a migrant or community language or diaspora language. And considering the number of speakers globally, which is estimated to be around 6 million, Croatian is a small language, so just slightly over the population of Sydney. Nonetheless, it boasts on long written history and linguistic proximity to several other South Slavic and Slavic languages, facilitating communication across the Slavic world with more or less effort and success. The Croatian Standard Language is the official language of the Republic of Croatia and holds co-official status in several neighbouring states and regions, and as you can see in this map. Additionally, it enjoys official minority status in numerous neighbouring countries and has obtained recognition as the 24th official language of the EU, and that happened in 2013. So Croatian migration to Australia dates back to the gold rush era, with significant influx of migrants actually coming in 60s and 70s of past century. So there were various motives that led Croatians to emigrate, including escaping poverty and seeking refuge from the communist regime, which, among many other things, also restricted the use of the Croatian identity and language, at least as by that name. Upon arrival in Australia, Croatians established numerous clubs, sport organisations, and notably community language schools, some as early as 1965. My data is generally from New South Wales, but very similarly development followed in Victoria, sometimes with a year or two difference. So despite challenges, the Croatian community achieved a remarkable milestone, the recognition of their language by Australian government bodies in 1979. Interestingly, at the time, so that language was still in Croatia referred as Serbo-Croatian, or in Croatia more often Croato-Serbian, or in the 80s already Croatian or Serbian. So, but in Australia, it was recognized as early as 1979 as Croatian. So understanding the significance of language preservation The community efforts led to inclusion of Croatian language studies at the high school certificate, HSC, in 1981. And again, I think it was 2 years later in Victoria, followed by the establishment of Croatian Studies at Macquarie University in 1983 and Croatian Studies Foundation in 1984. Croatia's declaration of independence in 1991 marked another pivotal moment, allowing the official acknowledgement of the language. The name, language was always there, but the name was now officially recognized as Croatian, even in its homeland. Reflecting the evolving activities that were happening in Croatian studies at Macquarie University, Macquarie approved the Croatian Studies Centre concept in 1994. However, it wasn't until 1998 that the centre obtained a designated space and was officially open. So the same year marked significant milestones, other than already mentioned ones. The initial memorandums of understanding with Croatian universities, the first one being University of Zagreb, and with the Croatian Ministry of Science and Education, ensuring financial backing for Macquarie University's Croatian Studies for a 5-year term. Croatia's European Union accession in 2013 elevated Croatian to the official language of the EU, necessitating the availability of all official documents in Croatian and permitting European Union Parliament members to deliver speeches in their own language. So despite consistent financial support and ongoing Croatian Studies Centre activities, and rather steady enrollments, recent discussions at Macquarie University proposed discontinuing 5 community languages, among which is Croatian and also Greek, and in particular these 2 in the recently published discussion paper are called administrative burdens, despite their long-standing external financial support. So this is essentially why we are here today, to discuss whether community languages or smaller languages, if we can call them that, deserve a place at Australian universities, and which factors should actually be taken into account when making such decisions. So the future beyond 2024 remains uncertain for Croatian studies and the other 5 languages. In particular for us, because the current financial support agreement is set to expire in September next year. And instead of initiating a new agreement that the Croatian community and Croatian government were hoping to see, the university is proposing for Croatian studies to be disestablished after 40 years. So as you can see here in the graph, the number of speakers in Australia, Croatian speakers in Australia, are rapidly declining from one census to the other. But most of you here would also know that the questions in the census have been somehow problematic. And we believe that the numbers are not real, or not all the speakers are essentially being captured. So currently, the latest census shows that there are 56,000 of Croatian speakers in Australia across the nation. But roughly, it's estimated that there are around 200,000 Croatians or people with Croatian ancestry living in Australia. So speaking of Australians and their language, most Croatian speakers these days, we see a lot of 2nd and even 3rd generation, are being among obviously older migrant groups, and a lot of speakers are considered to be heritage speakers, exhibiting a wide range of language proficiency levels, while strongly all identifying with their cultural roots. So here you see some 4 different definitions of who is a heritage language speaker. And all of these actually apply to Croatian speakers in Australia. So they are ranging from ideally bilingual or balanced bilinguals to the ones that essentially don't even speak any language or understand the language, but strongly identify with it. So to take you back 40 years ago, how it all started, I will address the start of the Croatian program, which at the time wasn't the only such program at Macquarie University. And I will try to also answer what I think enabled Croatian to remain at Macquarie for such a long time, while many other languages that were introduced at the same time, like, for example, Serbian and Polish, disappeared a while ago. So in 1982, it was actually Australian government, Commonwealth government that initiated grants for universities that were willing to trial offering community languages. Approved universities would receive $200,000 for each language offered over 3 years. Requirements included offering languages via distance teaching model and ensuring ongoing funding through local migrant communities that were about to be established later. Macquarie University secured the grant for Slavic studies, introducing at first Croatian, Serbian, and Polish, later expanding to include Ukrainian, Macedonian, Slovenian, and Russian. Oversight of the newly established Slavonic studies fell to Professor Peter Hill, originally from Western Australia, who at the time was residing and working in Germany, and his colleague, Dr. John Besmiris. Initially, it was actually Dr. Hill, who has no background, Slavic as far as I know, and whose specialty was Macedonian. But he was the one teaching Croatian until Luka Budak was recruited from Canada. And he was also strongly supported by, you can see Luka in the group photo in the middle with glasses. And he was supported by a local Croatian Franciscan priest and professor, linguist himself, Father Gracian Bršić, and there were some other local casual lecturers that were teaching at the beginning. At its peak, the number of Croatian units offered reached 18. However, due to many changes in curriculum at the university and restructurings that were happening over time, most or all cultural units, even those that were covering history, especially history of Dalmatia, and everyday culture, which were very popular with students, were gradually discontinued. Since 2021, Croatian Studies has encompassed only 6 language units. So over 40 years, student numbers fluctuated. Obviously, there were different moments in history that impacted how many students chose to study Croatian. And it's really hard to say how many students are we talking about, especially because there are different modes of enrollment, from elective units to major or our most popular program, diploma. But if I look back and take only annual enrollments into our first beginner course, that one remains more or less steady when all the enrollment options are available. And I'm speaking about 25 to 30 students each year starting their Croatian language learning path. Just in 2023, I had at the beginning of semester 1, I had 32 enrolled students in Croatian Studies 1, with 19 of those being enrolled in Diploma of Languages. So lecturers in languages that were appointed in 1983 and 84 were predominantly native speakers, whose roles at the university, now as employees of the university, were also to represent university in liaising with their respective communities and organizing various community engaging initiatives. So now speaking about all the other languages that were included at the time. So this involvement led to numerous conferences, public lectures, research collaborations, and especially the increase in research activities altogether. Consequently, to give it a kind of a framework for those additional activities beyond teaching the language and culture, the Croatian Studies Centre was established in 1994, and it was officially inaugurated in 1998, as I mentioned before. I think by that time, Serbian and Macedonian already disappeared, if I'm not mistaken. The centre has primarily focused on researching Croatian migration to Australia and New Zealand, publishing works by Australian Croatian authors, maintaining a unique reference library of approximately 4,500 titles and archive materials, And for the past 25 years, the Centre has published the scholarly journal, Croatian Studies Review, the unique one, because that's the only one where the Croatian topics are covered in English, so that it's kind of accessible to others, not just to Croatian speakers. And the Centre has also organised international conferences every 5 years at least. And the next one, for example, is scheduled for February next year, and will feature 80 papers, and will host over 100 delegates from across the globe. Recent additions to the Centre's activities, and I'm speaking here about last 3 years roughly, include a language proficiency testing centre, the only one outside Croatia accredited by Zagreb University, and a podcast produced with SBS Croatian, available globally through Spotify and other podcast platforms, which is offering weekly news in slower Croatian with 150 episodes currently available, averaging 3,000 downloads per episode within a few weeks of release. Croatian Studies, as one of the requirements in early days was that past those initial 3 years that the funding is secured from the community. So in the past, there were primarily, firstly, there were 2 sources, and in the last 20 years, Croatian Studies have been funded through 3 sources. That's Australian federal government for all the domestic students, right? Because their placements, their enrollments are subsidised. Croatian Studies Foundation, that through their activities, fundraising activities, raising money for either directly to contribute to the gap that might occur in finances for Croatian studies or for additional activities. And also, like I said, since 1998, it's directly from Croatian government. So as mentioned, those foundations in Croatians wasn't the only one at the time, were all founded in 1984. I think the Ukrainian was one of the first, and then Macedonian, there was also Serbian, they all disappeared in the meantime. And those foundations not only had the kind of the goal, and it was their main primary duty to raise the money for the programs, those foundations also became vital cultural hubs for their respective communities. And we can definitely say that for Croatian foundation that's been around now for 40 years. Official financial support from the Croatian government, like I said, was secured through a tripartite agreement starting in 1998, and initially was set at $100,000 annually over a 5-year period, and this amount was increased to $150,000 by 2014. This funding comes in addition to student fees and alongside various activities aimed at the community, student recruitment, advancement of Croatian studies, advancement of Macquarie University's visibility on local, national, and international levels. It also comes alongside additional funding secured through other grants and scholarships that is used for funding conferences, publishing, proceedings, and other publications. Just for example, the foundation is going to spend roughly between $30,000 and $40,000 additional for the conference in February. So going to the relevance of all that and why I kind of presented so much data to you, I was aiming to tell you a story and wanting you to come up with the conclusions yourself. I least spoke about language teaching, which was at the beginning also, it's the primary task that we cover. To anyone who ever started learning a language, I don't need to explain that you can't divide language and culture. So it's clear that teaching or learning any language also includes learning about culture, and that goes also for the community languages that we do here at Macquarie. So it's going beyond teaching conjugations and vocabulary that seem to be a perception of our university's management, that that's all we do. Regardless of not having culture units anymore, culture is taught through language and language is taught through culture. One doesn't exist without the other. So feedback that we got from students. Feedback that we get from students that are undertaking Croatian units at Macquarie University. And I'm so pleased that there are so many. There are some here in the room, and there are a few, if not more than a few, online. Often highlights a deeper understanding, gaining a deeper understanding and appreciation of Croatian culture, history, and identity. They say that they gain confidence in intercultural communication. They start seeing world from new perspectives, and they also develop curiosity about similar cultures or generally other cultures and other languages. Just recently, several days ago, one of my students who have just completed his diploma of languages in Croatian, a 70-plus-year-old CEO of several companies still working, was telling me over coffee how his language proficiency facilitated new business connections and enhanced communications with partners. Another former student recounted how their language learning journey reconnected previously fragmented family ties. Many individuals with Croatian ancestry express that language proficiency that they gain through the studies complete their sense of identity. These are only a few examples of individual benefits or personal benefits, but the advantages also extend to wider community. Reviewing former Croatian Studies Centre records in preparation for this talk, I actually discovered that most community language teachers that we currently have in the community and former ones, as well as many of the interpreters, and also many of the community leaders were our students at some point. Additionally, having a Croatian language program elevates the university's national and international reputation, regardless of how that small scale that might be, that's still the case. So for example, if Croatians in Croatia in average know about an Australian university, they know about this university. Most Croatian scholars visiting or conducting any type of research with Australian universities, whether there was another one, they will still have ties with Macquarie and they will visit Macquarie at some point. Over the past decade, just what I can recall since I've been here, so from top of my head, not going through the archives, Macquarie University hosted a premier, a president, multiple Croatian ambassadors, an Australian ambassador, university chancellors and deans from Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. In 2 years preceding the COVID pandemic, the Croatian Studies welcomed over 20 researchers through different mobility programs with Croatian universities and hosted at the last conference 40 international delegates. There were 3 Kotatel students who received PhDs, double degrees between University of Zagreb and Macquarie University just in the last 5 years. Each time that podcast that I mentioned earlier with 3,000 downloads within 2 weeks of its release, Macquarie University's name is heard globally, many times that it's been downloaded and listened to. Again, these are just some examples of the reputational impact that comes in addition to the reputation gained through publications or scholarly work by staff, associates, or research collaborations with colleagues elsewhere overseas. I mentioned individual, academic, and reputational gains. However, there is also impact on local Australian Croatian community, which is equally significant, if not even more significant. So just to mention a few activities, so both Croatian Studies Centre and the Foundation support community language schools through grants, awards, professional development workshops, public lectures, and so on. We also support cultural, business, and sport organisations and events, for example, annual Croatian Film Festival in Sydney, or Croatian annual soccer tournament that each year gathers more than 5,000 participants every year in a different Australian town. In conclusion, the journey of Croatian Studies at Macquarie, I think exemplifies a collaborative effort spanning 4 decades, nurturing language, culture and identity within the Australian Croatian community. This program has been instrumental in preserving language, fostering cultural connections and contributing significantly to academic and community spheres. The multi-layered impact extends beyond individuals, influencing whole communities, enhancing universities' reputation and fostering international connections. I therefore firmly believe, regarding of the circumstances where I think that this 40-year legacy is actually serves as a beacon of excellence in preserving a migrant language and culture, and that we have been very privileged. We just hope that we get to continue with that. So this exemplar demonstrates the possibilities that present themselves when universities collaborate with local communities and other stakeholders. It is a testament to what a multicultural society should aspire to, providing a platform for diverse constituents to celebrate their identities, cultures, and languages. Such programs also align with universities' roles in championing multicultural values, offering various migrant groups a vital space to embrace and promote their cultural and linguistic heritage. So allow me to finish with another definition of heritage speakers, one by a colleague from UNSW, Aniko Hatos, which beautifully summarizes, I think, the value of heritage languages, heritage speakers, and underscores why heritage languages and their speakers should be nurtured. So the term heritage underscores the ancestral connection that individuals have to these languages. Sorry, I'm reading on the angle, so it's a bit hard. It highlights the importance of passing down linguistic traditions, cultural values, and identity from one generation to the next, as linguistic links to a shared past, providing a sense of belonging and rootedness in a multicultural and evolving world. A heritage language speaker is someone who carries the torch of their linguistic lineage, embracing and embodying the heritage bestowed upon them by previous generations. I really think it's a beautiful summary of everything, even though I think it's not just heritage languages who deserve a space at Australian tertiary education level. Many others do as well, but today I'm focusing on this context. So in the realm of programs like Croatian Studies, there are no losers, just winners. So my question to you all is, should administrative burdens deter us from nurturing such invaluable programs? Or do you think the AI can do all this that we do? Thank you for listening, for coming, for engaging in discussions throughout the day, which I think you've seen also a lot of, little threads that are kind of almost combined now in my talk. So thank you again for coming and for engaging in the further discussion.